When I woke up this morning, I just felt compelled to rank all the films I've seen from the year 2015. Hi guys, so I've actually seen 26 films from this particular year, but I'm only going to be ranking my top 25 today. Now that might sound a little bit weird if this is your first time watching one of my rankings videos that I do, but the truth is that I always try and cap my lists at 25 films where I can. So I've got one dishonourable mention today that doesn't make it in. That film is Pixels. I thought I would like this film more, to be honest, because it's based around old school video games like Pac-Man, but I just couldn't get into it. I found it a little bit silly. Adam Sandler's the lead. The only reason I put it on in the first place was because I needed something that my kids could watch this one particular afternoon. So that film doesn't make it in, but 25 other films do. But before we get on and talk a little bit about those, first a quick reminder that the top 2 films today will go through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all and with great authority as to what the greatest film of all time is. But for now, let's concentrate on 2015. And we'll start with the film that I consider to be my 25th favourite from 2015. So straight away, a little bit of a surprise because I'm a big Tremors fan, but even I've got to admit this is definitely one of the more mediocre sequels. I mean, we do get a fantastic new location with this one, with South Africa. All the previous films had been set in Nevada. And it is fun watching the interplay between Burt and his new sidekick played by Jamie Kennedy, but the kills in this film are nothing to write home about at all. The CGI in this looks very, very cheap. There is one really well-written scene where Burt's trapped in a cage and there's like a tiger prowling around on the outside, but apart from that, this film is a little bit droll. I can't honestly recommend it. Literally, this is for diehards only. If you get to the 5th film and you're just desperate for more Tremors, fine, give it a watch, but it's definitely one of the weaker ones in the series for me. This film got critically ripped to shreds when it came out. I think it was originally intended to be sort of a half superhero, half body horror sort of a film, which could have been quite interesting. But as the release date approached, I think the studio completely lost their balls and decided to re-edit the movie to make it more of a generic superhero sort of movie. So all the experimental stuff was kicked out, basically. They even fired the director because he wasn't happy about the late changes in post-production. So this film was set up to fail. Although, strangely, I went to watch this at the cinema and I actually quite enjoyed it. It was only really the final fight that I thought was a little bit generic and boring, but everything up until then I thoroughly enjoyed. And for weeks afterwards, I was actually checking my phone to see what the box office was like for this, because I would have liked to have seen a sequel, but that was never going to happen. I think all the bad reviews really killed interest in this. And so they didn't go on to make any more films. Now, I've heard that they're going to remake the Fantastic Four and put it into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think when that happens, I think that film will probably be quite decent, and it will probably end up, therefore, becoming sort of the quintessential Fantastic Four experience. And so this film from 2015 is destined really to get even more forgotten in the coming years. But I think that's a shame, because I think this had potential. I thought it was very good, despite all the late changes, and I just think it's a real pity, the fate of this film. But the fact that I'm talking about a film in 23rd place as being quite good just shows you the quality of 2015, at least from my point of view. We're definitely getting into the good films already. This is a very original horror concept about a group of friends who like to meet up with each other on Skype and just basically chat shit of an evening. Not something that I can relate to personally, because we didn't have this sort of tech when I was in high school or uni. But these group of friends get more than they bargained for one night when a mysterious person comes into their private chat room. They can't see who this person is because they have no picture. And because this is a movie, these friends, they don't just log out and call it an evening. They stubbornly stay logged in. And eventually, this newcomer threatens our main characters, and the horror sort of goes on from there. But the really cool thing about Unfriended is just how original it is, because you watch the whole film through a computer screen. Like, the camera is static the whole time. You just see this cursor moving around. and all the characters are in their own little boxes on the screen. And literally, I've never seen a film done this way. I wasn't massively thrilled with how the story progressed in the second half necessarily, but just because of the freshness of the concept, it's absolutely worth checking out once. So we go from one really original concept for a horror film to another, because this is an extremely meta sort of a film. So what we've got here is a bunch of what you would call real world characters played by the likes of Nina Dobrev and Taysa Farmiga, and they are transported into a fictional ongoing camp slasher film, and they've got to try and survive the attentions of a killer by using their horror knowledge, and they can sort of spot the tropes coming a mile away because they come from the real world, so to speak. I might have missed out one or two key plot details there, a few sort of important nuances when it comes to this film, but it has been a while since I saw it. I'm surprised I didn't enjoy it more, to be honest, because I am into those old school camp slasher films like Friday the 13th and The Burning, which is what this film is paying homage to. I guess when it comes down to it, I just prefer the real thing rather than a film which is sort of, paying tribute to those sorts of films. The Rocky franchise was a big staple of my growing up, especially the first five films. These new ones featuring Apollo Creed's son, I do like them. I've seen both of them that have come out to date. They're well written, they're well acted, the fight scenes pack a punch. I do though think they're lacking a little bit of the X factor that made the earlier Rocky films special. They're just lacking a little bit of, I don't know, some kind of magic ingredient maybe. I mean, when I think back to how those earlier Rocky films made me feel as a kid, sat there watching Rocky knock out Apollo or Clubber Lang or Drago, I was buzzing, I was out of my seat as if it was like a real fight. I don't feel that way when I'm watching Creed's son knock somebody out, even though I do like the character and I'm definitely behind him. Maybe it's just that I'm getting older now. I don't tend to watch films from this series anywhere near as much as I did when I was much younger, but they're still good films. As boxing movies, they are good. And I would definitely watch the next one that's coming out. I think they're bringing Creed 3 out next year, although the fact that Rocky himself is not going to be in the next one is certainly a bum note. And in the world of Rocky, you don't want to be a bum. Another big franchise from my youth. I watched the original Mad Max trilogy several times as I was growing up, but they left it a long time between the third film and the fourth one. So by the time that Fury Road came out, the series wasn't even in my thoughts. Plus, the fact that Mel Gibson wasn't going to be returning was definitely a sour note for me. I would have liked to have seen him come back, even as a 50 going on 60-year-old. I mean, at the end of the day, Mad Max, it's about driving cars. You don't need to be some really young guy who can throw lots of punches. So I'm sad that Mel didn't return, and for that reason, I kind of avoided the film when it was on at the cinema. But then I saw all these rave reviews online, like people saying, "Oh, Fury Road's the best action film ever," blah blah. So I watched the film at home at the earliest opportunity, and I was a little bit underwhelmed, to be honest. The experience sort of reminded me of when I finally watched The Exorcist at the age of 40, and I'd had my entire life up to that point with people telling me, "Oh, The Exorcist is the scariest film ever," and then when I put it on, I was kind of like, "Well, come on then, scare the shit out of me," and it just didn't really happen. And it was the same with Mad Max Fury Road. I was kind of sat there thinking, "Well, come on then, hit me with this action, which is like the best thing ever," and yeah, it didn't happen then either, but probably expectations were just way too high. They're going to be bringing out a fifth film for this based around the Charlize Theron character from Fury Road. I think that's coming out either this year or next year. When that comes out, I'll probably revisit the entire series, which will mean giving Fury Road a second chance, and we'll see how that goes. I'm not saying this film is bad at all. No way. I did think it was good. I just didn't think it hit those incredible highs that people said that it did. For me, the weakest of the Terminator franchise, but you know what? I can still enjoy it, mainly because I am a die-hard Terminator fan. I even went all the way through a Terminator PS4 game 2 or 3 years ago and thoroughly enjoyed it. This film, though, it does have its problems. It's a little bit too Back to the Future-ish for me, with all of its crisscrossing narrative overlays. Part of why most people love the first two films is just the simplicity of those stories. You don't have to think about them too much. With Terminator Genysis, you sort of do to a point. And I'm not entirely sure that the mythology as it's laid out in this film or added to in this film completely matches up to the films we've seen before, though I could be wrong about that. Also, this film is not cast that well, and I'm talking several of the roles here. Emilia Clarke, for example, very good in Game of Thrones from what I saw of that series, but is she a Sarah Connor? No. But you know what? This is still a fun sci-fi action adventure. If I'm doing a full run through of these and I get to Genysis, it's not a case that I'm sat there thinking, oh God, have I got to watch this one again? No, it's more a case of, yeah, I could do a bit of Genysis before we then move on to Dark Fate. On a good day, I might even say this one could pip Terminator Salvation. On a good day. This for me is the best of the Fast and the Furious films. I guess the fact that I've got my least favourite Terminator film right next to my favourite Fast and the Furious film just goes to show you how I feel about Terminator compared to the Fast and the Furious. But I still have a lot of respect for the Fast and the Furious franchise. I have seen all of these films. That just shows that my interest has been maintained by this series as it's gone along. Fast and the Furious went through a real golden era. I'd say 5, 7, and 8, a trio of really great films there. Just recently, things have tapered off a little bit. I felt particularly burned by Hobbs and Shaw. I didn't like that one at all. I really think they could do with making number 10 really great, just to keep people's interest in this going. As for number 7, though, I mean, this was just awesome. Great locations. My favourite possibly being Dubai, and the Statham's in this film as well. He's absolutely awesome. So yeah, for me, this is absolutely the pinnacle of this series, and it's very emotional as well. This is the one where Paul Walker died halfway through production. Those scenes at the end, I'm not sure if it's his brother possibly playing the character by that point or not, but when you're watching those scenes with Dom and the car at the end, it touches me right here. Not on the neck, a bit lower down at the heart. This film takes place in America back in the 17th century, 16th century. God knows what century. I just know that it's a long time ago. So our main story takes place on a kind of farmstead, homestead. There are about 6 to 8 people living in this place. But bad things start to happen. Animals dying and people disappearing. And it's suspected that witchcraft might be to blame, although we're not sure throughout this film whether the problem is emanating from our main group of characters or from somewhere on the outside. We do get our answers late on, and they're very satisfying when they come, actually. And I could easily picture a sequel for this film, but I don't think the director, Robert Eggers, is the sort of guy who would go back to his earlier work. I'm just guessing on that, but from looking at what he's done in his career so far, I think he's going to be one of these directors, a bit like Tarantino, where he just does one film every now and again, but when he does do that film, it's highly, highly praised. I mean, as well as this, he's also done a film called The Lighthouse, which is very, very good. And also The Northman, which I've not seen, but has been very well received by critics. This film, honestly, it's the sort of horror film that gives horror a good name. It's so stylish. Like, somehow it looks really good, even though the whole thing takes place on this crappy, dirty little farm. It's just shot very well, well acted, well scripted. Yeah, The Witch, brilliant. This is one I saw at the cinema, and I was absolutely buzzing on the way home because I really enjoyed it. It's a surprisingly scary film for a sequel, because I thought I would be desensitized to this second time around. What made the first Sinister so scary was the fact that you didn't know who was behind the videotapes for the longest time. Was it a real killer? Was it something supernatural? Similar sort of setup then to Unfriended in a way. But by the time you get to part 2, you know the answer to that question. So in theory, the newer set of videotapes should be far less effective. And yet I was still breaking out into goosebumps. I still found them extremely chilling. Possibly by the time I got to the one with the rats and the buckets, I was maybe yearning for something different to the formula by then. I kind of wonder, would it have been a good idea to have one of the victims in these tapes escape randomly? That would have certainly made me point to the screen and go, oh, look at that. But I don't know, maybe they were going to do something like that with the third film. But sadly, box office receipts weren't great for this, and they had to end the series here. But as a 1-2 sucker punch, Sinister 1 and 2 are extremely good. Well worth checking out. Watch them both in the same evening, though you probably need a stiff drink afterwards. I have a different opinion to the rest of the world when it comes to the second Avengers film, Age of Ultron, seemingly. If I had a pound for every time I've heard someone say, first Avengers film, great, second one lost the plot though, and then the third film, it went back to being awesome again, yeah, I'd probably be a very rich man, but I am totally not in that camp. Like, for me, the first Avengers film is probably one of the weaker Marvel films overall. Yes, it's exciting seeing all the heroes come together for the first time, but I don't think it's a very well-written film. And on repeat viewings, I find all the New York stuff, which goes on for quite some time, to be quite boring, actually. Age of Ultron, for me, is where they really perfected the formula. Like, this is such a fun, enjoyable adventure from start to finish. I'm never bored, not even once. I think the newer characters that come in are very good. Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and the new villain, Ultron. Ultron is a way better villain for me than Loki, who really belongs in the Thor movies. He didn't really translate from the Thor subsection of films to the Avengers films that well for me, to be honest. Yeah, so Age of Ultron is, I wouldn't say it's my favourite Avengers film overall. Maybe some of the later ones that finished off that run of films would possibly be classed as better than this one for me. But if it's just between the first Avengers film and Age of Ultron, I'm going for the latter every single time. This is another one that I just happen to own. The story of how I got this is quite interesting because I actually won an online snooker competition. I didn't even know there was a prize, but the admin emailed me and said, hey, you've won a £10 Amazon voucher. And I was like, ooh, cool. So that's how I ended up getting Insidious 3. It's a little bit unfair, though, in a way, that this film has made it to 13th in this list, because I don't think I've actually seen the last 10-15 minutes of it. So what happened was, I put it on this one night, but I was extremely tired. Like, it was very late. I'd had a long day, and I think I just nodded off. And then the following night, I just didn't go back to it. I just went straight to Insidious 4. But that doesn't really matter, because this is not a series which is played out in chronological order. Like, Insidious 3 is actually the start point of the overall story. But yeah, at some point I'll have to go back and finish it off, obviously. But the first hour and a bit was great. Like, I know I was really enjoying this film. Like, the lead actress in this, I think she carries the film very, very well. And there are a number of really good scares in the first half. Plus, Lee Winnell directed this film. Now, I've always been a fan of his work. He did some really great stuff with Saw, and more recently he did The Invisible Man in 2020, which was brilliant. So I am very confident that Lee Winnell managed to complete this film with the same degree of competence that he has conducted himself with all throughout his career. But yeah, I'm going to finish it off at some point. I would consider myself a fan of Star Wars, but on the lowest possible rung. Like, I'm the sort of fan who might not even check out a new Star Wars film until like 6 months after it's come out. I'll watch it when I'm ready to watch it, sort of thing. This is why I say that I belong on the lowest rung of Star Wars fandom. But for me, this is the best of the Star Wars films. Yes, it does have a lot of the same beats of some of the earlier ones, but I don't think that mattered when it came to this. For me, the point of The Force Awakens was about giving us another Star Wars film, but doing it with all the modern CGI, all the up-to-date shooting tech, and this film just looks phenomenal. This might be the best looking film in this rankings today. I mean, visually, it's just stunning. I'm not massively keen on Daisy Ridley in the lead role, although that's partly to do with where they eventually take the character as well. I think John Boyega, is that his name? I think he makes a much bigger splash, especially in this first one of the newer trilogy. It's great to see Han Solo back. There's a very poignant scene between him and his son, and there's also a great sequence where Hans is fighting these tentacled monsters on a ship, which I really enjoy. There's loads of good material in this film. So yeah, Star Wars The Force Awakens, absolutely superb. This is another comeback movie of sorts, similar to The Force Awakens. It makes a very good companion piece to the original Jurassic Park, because in the original film there was a park, but it wasn't quite open yet. In this one, there is a park and it's open, so that just adds to the overall peril now that you've got all these dozens, maybe hundreds of tourists running around panicking once the action starts, and the dinosaurs in this film look absolutely great. I like the chemistry between the two lead actors, Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard. I love the rolling ball idea, the means by which the tourists get around the park in this. And even though I still think the original Jurassic Park is the best film in this series, when you compare the original trilogy to this newer trilogy, I think the newer trilogy wins, because that original trilogy, even though it has a great first film, the second and the third film are probably the weakest films in the franchise, whereas this newer trilogy, it just great film, great film, great film. And I'm not even sure this is the best of these newer three as well. I think they stepped things up even more when it came to Fallen Kingdom and Dominion. Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension, aka Paranormal Activity 6, not a very highly regarded one. I think this film suffered a little bit because it was, at the time, the last of a very big batch of Paranormal Activity films that had all come out very, very quickly. Like, they used to release these films every year, just like they did with the Saw films, you know, bum, 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 bum. And by the time that the sixth one came out, I think people were just a little bit sick of them. You know, people needed a break. But this film definitely needs to be reappraised, because I think it's really, really good. They've got this thing in this where the main characters can see this kind of ghostly presence in the air, or maybe they can't see it. It's sort of there, but it isn't. And there are so many really creepy scenes throughout the film. Like, there's this one moment where two guys are watching this videotape that they found, and a girl from the videotape just randomly starts talking to them through the screen. It's a little bit of a play on the whole Ring thing. Also, later on, I mean, once you get to the finale, the action's fast and frenetic, and the sitting room's spinning around, and there's a portal, and there's lots of good stuff. So, yeah, for me, Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension, even though it's not considered to be one of the best of these, I personally think it's one of the series' high points. When I was talking about Age of Ultron earlier, I'd completely forgotten that there was still one more Marvel film to come today. I would say that Ant-Man is one of my favourite subsections of Marvel. As soon as this film was announced back in the day, I was really fascinated by the concept of it. You know, this idea of having a superhero who can shrink to like a minuscule size, because I'd never forgotten the experience I had as a kid watching a 50s film called The Incredible Shrinking Man. In that film, a guy basically, as the result of a science experiment going wrong, he shrinks to a really tiny size, and he ends up fighting a tarantula in his basement. It's really creepy, that film. Marvel's version of events doesn't go into horror at all. You wouldn't have expected it to, but it's still a really colourful, well-written film. It's got some great characters. I like Ant-Man as a character, brilliantly played by Paul Rudd. They've got Michael Douglas in this. I mean, what a catch that was. Evangeline Lilly as well, playing the Wasp. An actress I really like in anything that she does. Michael Pena. And there's a great villain called Yellow Jacket. Marvel apparently has a reputation for not producing good villains. Well, this guy is absolutely awesome. And I love the ending as well, with the Thomas the Tank Engine thing and the train track. So I haven't done a Marvel ranking in quite a long time now. But if I did one today, I imagine that this film would come in the top 10 as it has done today. A Bond film that a lot of people aren't really that keen on. I've even seen die-hard James Bond fans rank this 24th out of 25. But I've always really liked it personally, apart from the ending. I think once the action switches to London in this film for the final sort of 15-20 minutes, I think it loses its way a little bit. It's like they just completely ran out of ideas when it got to the finale of this film. Maybe they had a deadline or something, and they just couldn't come up with anything. But the 2 hours leading up to that point, it's just absolutely brilliant. I love what Christoph Waltz does with the Blofeld character. He's super creepy, and everything to do with the Spectre organisation actually is really satisfying in this, albeit I could do without the loose connections to previous movies. I love the minimalistic approach to the volcano setting, much better than the more fantasy version from You Only Live Twice. I love the Hinks henchman. That fight on the train is brilliant. The main theme song is really, really good. Pre-title sequence, superb. Great Bond girl with Madeline. And yeah, it's just super stuff, this. Maybe the fact that the ending is really poor is why a lot of people don't like it. Maybe if you're coming out of the cinema, the ending is the first thing you think of when you try and analyse the film in your head. I don't know, but For me personally, I think this is the best of Craig's films. This is one that I've got on DVD, and you can tell by the sticker that I didn't splash out that much on this one. I got it from a second-hand store. This is a film which is based on real life events. So basically, back in the 90s, several groups of people tried to get to the top of Everest on the same day, and a number of people ended up dying in all sorts of different ways, in different parts of the mountain as well. So in this film, we switch around a lot between different groups, but I think that works quite well for the story, actually. This film is very accurate in terms of depicting what actually happened. Like, as soon as I'd seen it, I went home and researched the full tale on Google just to see what differences there were between the real life stuff and the movie, but they're both identical, honestly. Number of great actors in this: Jason Clarke, Josh Brolin, Sam Worthington, Keira Knightley, and I would read you the rest of the names, but the sticker is kind of blocking it. The film looks marvellous as well. When I said that The Force Awakens was the best looking film in this list potentially, I might have been a bit premature on that, because Everest can certainly compete very well with The Force Awakens on looks. Anytime you have a film with big snowy mountains and vistas and stuff, it always looks great, especially if there's a lot of stuff being shot on location. This is a very exciting film, honestly, and very emotional towards the end. One of Tarantino's lesser celebrated films, though in my opinion it's one of his best. It's a Western, although not obviously so, because it's set not in the desert somewhere like New Mexico, but it's set up north in Wyoming, in the dead of winter. There's a snowy landscape. So what we've got here, a group of random characters who end up sort of stranded at this kind of open area bar. It's half a hotel as well, I think. But these characters can't leave anytime soon because of the storms, and because this location is so isolated. But not everybody is who they say they are at first, so secrets will come out as the film progresses. It's not the most action heavy of films, but the dialogue is just so sharp, as you'd expect from a Tarantino film. There's some amazing conversations in this, and some great monologues as well, particularly from Samuel L. Jackson. It's another great collaboration between Samuel L. Jackson and Quentin Tarantino, and definitely this film deserves way more acclaim than it's had. I love horror anthology films. I'm a big fan of the VHS franchise. Every now and again, I come across more of a one-off horror anthology film, and Tales of Halloween is that. I've got it as part of a double bill, along with a film called Haunt. In and of itself, a fantastic film. Honestly, this is a great double bill to watch on Halloween. Start with the anthology and work your way up to the traditional slasher movie. You won't even need to think about getting Jamie Lee or Donald Pleasance out of the cupboard. Tales of Halloween has 10 stories in total, so a lot to get through. I think the runtime's roughly an hour, 40 minutes, so maybe there's about 10 minutes devoted to each story, but the consistency of the stories is really, really great. There's virtually no duff stories in this. There's a little bit of a playfulness to the tone of this. Some of the stories get a little bit light at times, but it never quite goes into horror comedy. There's still some really gruesome, creepy stuff in this, but yeah, there is a playful tone at times. There's no wraparound tale, but I'm glad about that, because with 10 stories to get through, I don't think the runtime could have afforded a wraparound story. Adrian Barbeau pops up to say a couple of words now and again, I think, between the stories, but mostly you just get a title card and then straight into the next tale. So yeah, this is fast becoming one of my favourite horror anthologies to watch during the month of October. Not only do I love horror anthology films, I'm also a fan of found footage, and this one floats my steamboat. It's about a group of high schoolers who are involved in a play. I'm not sure what the play's called or what it's about, if it's even a real play, but I know that it ends with a scene involving a hanging at a gallows, so yeah, clearly a very cheerful story. Maybe not the sort of thing that younger school kids would want to put on as a play, but I guess for older high schoolers it's fine. But some of these kids don't actually want to be in the play. That as it's getting closer to the time of the play, they're getting cold feet. So the night before, they travel to the school, break in, and what they want to do is trash the stage so that the play can't go ahead. But they accidentally get locked into the school, and then they are bothered by some kind of supernatural entity that's going to try and take them out. And This film is just very, very well staged and executed. It's directed and performed by people who know what the hell they're doing. Like the first 20, 30 minutes is a little bit slow, but there's enough humour and funny things going on early doors to keep you interested. But when the horror starts, it's bloody good. I mean, a lot of the setups and the scares are just, they're done to perfection. Really, really cool. So for me, The Gallows it's in the Premier League of found footage, or the Major League, I guess, if you're American. I haven't done a Mission Impossible ranking on the channel yet. I'm kind of waiting for 7 and 8 to come out because I think those films will end the series probably, or certainly the run of Mission Impossible films involving Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt. This fifth one, though, for me, is when the series went up to another level. I mean, there is so much great material in this one. I think my favourite section of the movie is when Ethan has to go to the opera house. There's so much cool stuff happening in that sequence. And then you've got the moment where he's hanging off the side of the plane, and then there's that part where he drops into that water tank thing with all the moving machinery, and then there's a bike chase that's really cool, and there's this awesome new character played by Rebecca Ferguson, and there's a great villain as well, probably the best villain since John Voight in the original. So yeah, if I was to do a Mission Impossible ranking, this would be a candidate to possibly win it, but it doesn't make it into my grand final of 100 best films of all time because it's only come third today, and you have to be in the top two. So now let's crack on and find out which two films will be going through to the grand final, starting with the film in second place. I only found out the other day that Denis Villeneuve directed this film. He's fast becoming one of my favourite directors because he also did the Blade Runner remake. He also did Dune. So take those two films and add it to this one, Sicario. That's a trio of brilliant films and all different from each other as well. I've not even seen most of this guy's work either, but he's certainly someone who clearly knows what he's doing. So Sicario is a thriller that's to do with drug running between Mexico and the United States. We spend a lot of time with the FBI focusing on them as they try to clamp down on this sort of thing. It's a film that reminds me of Call of Duty somehow, and it also reminds me of a film I saw a long time ago called Traffic, starring Michael Douglas and Benicio del Toro, who ironically is also in this film. There's also Emily Blunt, who is amazing in the lead role, and Josh Brolin's in this as well. Second time today that Josh Brolin has popped up in a film. He was also in Everest, which came 7th today. So 2015 was clearly a brilliant year for him. I love Sicario. I think it's so well directed. It looks awesome, nicely paced. I've not seen the sequel. There is a sequel, Sicario 2 Day of the Soldado. Doing this video today has just reminded me that I really need to get on and watch this film. I'd probably really enjoy it. But there is one more film in 2015 I like even more than this one. Let's now find out what it is. This is a film that me and my oldest son really love. He's got a real thing for anything that takes place on Mars. It's quite sad, actually, that I can't yet show him Total Recall because it's an 18. There's a game coming out soon on PS5 called Deliver Us to Mars, which we're both looking forward to. It's something that we can play together, but this film, I mean, wow. It's a Ridley Scott film. That's the first thing to say. Now, he is a director I've really admired for a long, long time. He's done so many epic films. This one is about a guy, played by Matt Damon, who gets stranded on Mars when the shuttle he's meant to be leaving on takes off without him. So he's got to sustain himself on the planet for almost a year, I think, but there's no water on this planet, and he's got to create his own food out of nothing almost. But the ways and means that he ends up surviving this year, they're just ingenious. We spend a lot of time as well with characters back home at NASA as they come up with ways to help him, because it's taking them a long time to get together a potential rescue voyage. But you really get behind this character. It's a very emotional film. I won't spoil what happens late on in it, but I just think it's really, really awesome. I did miss out on seeing it at the cinema. I set out to the cinema on the bus with the intention of seeing it, but halfway there I got a text off my wife saying that she'd lost the remote control and did not know where it was. Now, I realised that it was probably me who had lost it because I'd had the TV just before I went out, and I figured that I'd probably put it down somewhere stupid like upstairs or something, just wandering around the house with it, you know, as you do. So rather than just play dumb, I thought I'll do the decent thing. I got off the bus, went home, found it for her, but by that point I'd missed the chance to watch The Martian at the cinema. But thankfully, now that I've got this exquisite 4K version, which looks fantastic, I don't have to look back on that cinema experience with regret anymore. Right, that's the end of today's ranking. We've got The Martian and Sicario going through to the grand final. I'll quickly read the names to you of some of the films that came out in 2015 that I've not seen, but I would like to. So, The Woman in Black 2, Run All Night, Bridge of Spies, The Hunger Games 4, it's not called that, but you get the point. The Revenant, I watched about 45 minutes of that once and was just bored to tears. Do let me know if it improves after the first act. And finally, The Vatican Tapes, which I believe is another found footage film. Right, we'll leave it there for today. I'm delighted to be back making videos again. I've had a horrible time over the past month. I've had issues with mics and things and buying new equipment and buying stuff that's just not worked out. It's just not worked the way that it should. It's been extremely frustrating. So assuming this video has worked and uploaded properly and I'm going again, I'm doing stuff again, fantastic, because I've had a really, really frustrating time because I enjoy doing this. Right, that's it for today. I'll leave it there. I'll be back soon to do my 2016 ranking. Until next time, bye-bye.